Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Last October, the Prime Minister commissioned the former Labour adviser Matthew Taylor to report on modern working practices, specifically how to ensure a rapidly changing economy doesn't disadvantage certain kinds of workers. Well, this morning Theresa May has joined Matthew Taylor for the launch of his report. He says the UK has a great record on creating jobs, but hasn't paid enough attention to the quality of those jobs. So what exactly does he suggest? Mr Taylor says it's time for an end to the cash-in-hand economy, which is worth up to £6 billion a year, much of it untaxed. He says payment for traditional cash jobs like window cleaning and decorating should now be made digitally. He's also recommending that people who work in the gig economy, that's certain kinds of freelance or short-term contract work, be classed as workers and not self-employed. That change in classification for more than 1 million people would mean some firms could have to pay millions of pounds in national insurance contributions every year. However, he doesn't call, as some unions wanted, for the banning of zero-hours contracts, nor does he argue fees that workers pay to take employers to tribunals should be scrapped. The government, of course, doesn't have to accept all of the recommendations in the review. But Theresa May says reforming work practices involves finding the right balance of rights and responsibilities. Meanwhile, the government has reached a settlement on teachers' pay in England and Wales, which will mean a real terms cut for most teachers as they're limited to a 1% pay rise over the next year. Although those at the bottom of the scale can receive a 2% rise. Well, we're joined in the studio by Chi Onwurah for Labour and Chris Philp for the Tories. Welcome to both of you. Chris Philp, if you're a worker in the gig economy now and you see Matthew Taylor standing there with the Prime Minister, what can you confidently expect to change in your working conditions?
Well, I think you can expect the government to look carefully at this report. We commissioned it, after all, because we recognise that people who are working in the so-called gig economy don't have all of the rights that regular employed people do. And as more people start working in the flexible economy, which is a good thing because it creates jobs, we need to make sure they're looked after. And ideas like having them pay national insurance, but also get benefits like sick pay and holiday pay, I think is a really interesting idea. He also said we need to make sure that people working for, say, Uber are definitely getting the minimum wage. And I think that's also an important point. The minimum wage has gone up by 26% under the Conservatives. I'm really proud of that Conservative achievement, but I'm also keen to make sure that everybody, including people in the gig economy, benefit from that enormous increase in the minimum wage.
So the government's going to look at these recommendations, but they won't necessarily accept them all. Is that right?
No, well, I think that's right. They commissioned the report because we did identify this big problem. We are hoping, by the way, that there'll be constructive engagement from the Labour side, as the PM sort of was saying yesterday, and I hope many of these ideas will get taken forward. But clearly you've got to be very careful to make sure that balance is struck between giving extra rights to low-paid workers but not actually destroying jobs at the same time. And over the summer, I think the government will weigh up that balance to make sure we strike the right balance between those two considerations.
All right, before I open it up, one thing, most workers in the gig economy as independent contractors have no protection against unfair dismissal, no right to redundancy payments, no right to receive the minimum wage. Use the example of Uber that they do, but they have no right to receive the minimum wage, no right to paid holiday and no right to sickness pay. If their status is reclassified as worker, dependent contractor, as Matthew Taylor suggests, will they get all those things?
Well, that's what the government's going to look at. But
what do you think? Should they get all those things?
I think the implication is if someone is in essentially paid employment with one employer who directs their activity, and to all intents and purposes they are that person's boss, then in my view, yes, they should get those rights. What we've got to do carefully is draw that line between someone who is essentially an employee versus someone who is genuinely a freelance contractor, maybe working for a whole number of different people, and we've got to get that line drawn in exactly the right place.
Which part, Chi Onwurah, of Matthew Taylor's report would a Labour government implement?
Well, the fundamental principle, which is that we should have that everyone is entitled to a fair and decent job, and that they should be treated as human beings and not as cogs in a machine. Those are absolutely principles that we should be able to take forward. But the problem is that, regardless of what Chris has been saying, for the last 7 years, we haven't seen that being supported. We've seen the greatest undermining of working rights, for decades. And so,
which rights have been undermined?
Well, for example, no access to the tribunal fees has meant that so many working people can't actually establish what their rights are. They can't have access to justice, if you like, and that only brings in £9 million. It was really a very underhanded move by the government in order to prevent workers from establishing their rights.
Right. Okay. Well, so that's one. That's one right that you said be removed. Matthew Taylor hasn't recommended that be reinstated. In terms of jobs that you mentioned, do you accept that there has been a massive move in job creation over the last 7 years? That's not the government, that is business, of course, but you could say government created the conditions. Yeah, absolutely, but government can't say they directly created those jobs. That's a good thing.
It's good to have jobs, but jobs should be a route out of poverty. And what this government has done, and what the last government done, has changed that. So now work is no longer a route out of poverty because it is so many low-paid jobs. And we see we see nurses who are working but who are having to use food banks. I see constituents having to have 2 low-paid jobs just to make ends meet, and at the same time not having the protections that you spoke about.
I've got to put the facts on record. I've got to put the facts on record. We've created 2 million new jobs. The unemployment is at a 40-year low, which is a job.
But Chiomore accepted that.
And on that point, the minimum wage has gone up by a staggering 26% under the Conservatives, and the poorest paid 6 million have been lifted out of income tax entirely. So basic rate taxpayers, which includes nurses and teachers and firemen and doctors, all now paying £1,000 a year less in tax. Now, you've got to put all of that together, and given the mess we inherited and given the difficulties in the rest of Europe, that is a fantastic achievement on jobs in very difficult circumstances.
People are £2,600 a year on average poorer because of your combination of tax increases, VAT tax increases. VAT is the least progressive tax. You increase that, and also the absence of any wage rises amongst both the public and the private sector. We have said that we will put in place a £10 minimum wage. You can't match that because your promise is to increase the minimum wage. You're actually not even going to meet you're not going to meet the promises that you have made. So people need to share this prosperity that you're talking about, and they don't, and that's why.
Let's talk about another aspect of protections and rights. 0 hours contracts. There's been an awful lot of debate between the two parties about 0 hours contracts. Do you think they are a good thing and should stay?
Well, clearly it's better if people have full-time jobs. But let's not forget, 75% of the 2.8 million new jobs are full-time jobs. Only 3% of all jobs are 0 hours. Now, there was recently a survey done amongst McDonald's employees, many of whom are on these so-called flexible or 0 hours contracts, and 80% of them actually found it suited their lifestyle. What was wrong is when there were so-called exclusive 0 hour contracts, where somebody was tied to a job, they couldn't get employment elsewhere, despite being guaranteed no work at all. And we, the Conservatives, legislated to ban those 2 or 3 years ago, and that was definitely the right thing to do.
Do you accept that many workers do want that flexibility? I mean, there is quite strong statistical evidence that say with the right protections, people do like that flexibility, and they do those jobs for that reason. Matthew Taylor, who's a former Labour advisor, is calling for those protections in work in his report, but he says that we need to keep flexibility in the jobs market. Is he right?
Our manifesto made it quite clear that we want to abolish 0 hour contracts but retain flexibility. And what we're proposing...
But isn't that what 0 hours contracts done if you had the right protections?
No, I think it's really important actually to say that 0 hour contracts give all the flexibility, all the control of the flexibility,
but none of the benefit
with the employer, not with the employee. And what we've done is we've looked at the model in the New Zealand model, which gives rights and gives us minimum number of hours, but also does allow for flexibility. It's possible.
Let me just bring in John Bird. I mean, as a route out of poverty, I can't remember which of my guests said so, I mean, jobs are the best way of doing that, but only if they have the right protections and the right level of pay?
Well, yeah. I mean, jobs can be a death trap. Jobs can take you places and leave you there. And that's why in the big issue we're always trying to move our people on, even though many occasions they're not going to go anywhere because they come with a lot of baggage. But the point is you've really got to see jobs as a stage up. Where I disagree with most of the argument, left and right, is if somebody wrote to me and said, I want a job and I'm waiting around, can you give me a job? And applied for the job. And I said, I would probably put them with the rest of the pile. But if they said to me, I'm working in Poundland, I hate the job, I don't like the hours, I don't like what I'm doing, but I'm doing it because I've got to be doing something to keep myself hale and hearty, I would pick that person because that person is someone who's going to make the most of it. But unfortunately, most of the Poundland jobs are for people who are stuck. And we've got to do something about that.
Well, and for people who are stuck and people who perhaps want to grow and progress, Chris Phil, I mean, is it right that gig economy companies should be the ones paying national insurance contributions on people who work for them? And will the government make that change?
Well, like I said, the government are going to study the report over the summer. But if someone is essentially, to all intents and purposes, an employee, and people who work for Uber more than, X hours, like, I don't know, 25, 30 hours a week, are to all intents and purposes employees, I think we do need to look at that to make sure that national insurance is paid, because we do still have a gigantic deficit, £1 billion a week we need to close. And it's only fair that those workers do get the kind of rights that you mentioned a few minutes ago, things like sick pay and holiday pay. So it is right that we make sure those workers have those protections. And we are here, the Conservatives are here, and I hope Labour are as well, to stand up for those people and make sure they are protected. But if we push it too far, we'll end up destroying jobs. And the jobs miracle we've seen, and it is a jobs miracle, will be put at risk.
Right. Well, I mean, it sounds like you may be rowing back from some of the things that Matthew Taylor is actually putting forward. He also said they should end the cash-in-hand economy, Chiomwara. A lot of people pay cash in hand to people they employ. Do you think that should stop?
I think the death of the cash-in-hand economy, or the cash economy, has been much exaggerated. So I think people are going to continue to use cash. What is the issue here is when taxes and pension contributions, etc., aren't paid. And I think what some of the points that Matthew Taylor is making around using technology to empower workers, so that when you pay, they have the technology, which means it's automatically pays the tax, automatically makes a pension contribution. That's really important, because it's really important. Tech so far has been about taking power away from working people. We, a Labour government, will make sure it empowers working people to be in control of their jobs, their work, and their tax payments.
Some of this report is based on the working practices of Uber and companies like Deliveroo. Your colleague Rebecca Long-Bailey said today it's not morally acceptable to use Uber. Do you agree?
What Rebecca said was that her personal choice is not to use.
But she said it's because it wasn't morally acceptable.
She doesn't feel that their working practices are morally acceptable.
Does she think Uber are the only ones who have, in her mind, morally unacceptable work practices?
Yeah, it's really important that we look at about what the companies are doing and how they are treating their working people. Now, what I say is that Uber and other these companies deliver real benefits, and particularly if you're a woman on her own.
So it's not morally unacceptable then?
You want the services, but you also want to be sure that their working practices are the right ones, and that's what a Labour government would ensure.
You need to talk to the drivers. If you talk to the drivers, people have booked Uber for me, and I always talk to the drivers, and probably 50% think it's good and 50%. So what we've got to do is we've got to lift the Uber economy up.
Well, that is a fair point, John, and that's hopefully what this is going to do. But don't forget, 100% of Uber drivers have chosen to do that. So they have exercised choice. We believe in freedom.
We could do the whole programme on this, and we will at some stage, but thank you both for coming in.
Workers in the UK employed on contracts that don't guarantee any hours should qualify for sick pay and holiday pay, and their employers should make national insurance contributions. Those are some of the recommendations in a major report commissioned by the government, which is calling for changes to the running of the so-called gig economy. Theresa May has welcomed the report, saying it makes a major contribution to the debate about work practices in Britain, but she says she doesn't want to stop the clock. Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
It was the Prime Minister who made the point. The vast majority of us spend more than half our waking hours doing one thing, work. Whether steady or insecure, full-time or self-employed, single job or multiple, the world of work has changed. Appearing alongside Theresa May, Matthew Taylor said it was time for a reset. Yes, the country has been very good at creating work, employment levels are at a record. He said it was now time to focus on quality.
Our national performance on the quantity of work is strong, but quantity alone is not enough for a thriving economy and for a fair society. So we believe now is the time to complement that commitment to creating jobs with the goal of creating better jobs.
Victor Nix likes his job for Uber. Flexible, no guaranteed hours and few benefits.
I do love to drive my car, and I love people. I love to chat interesting people, and the money the ratio with my time, it's decent.
For Felicity Flynn, a very different story from the world of 0 hours contracts.
It's really, really insecure because I found that a lot of the problems I had was sometimes if there was a lot of work, I'd work too much so that I'd get really, really tired.
So, what does this new world of work look like? One big point is that the majority of us, 63%, are actually in full-time work. About a quarter of us, 26%, are in part-time work, and 15% of us are self-employed. There are certainly many new ways of working, and the inquiry focuses on two. The gig economy, that's those food delivery drivers, those minicab drivers. There are around 1.3 million people in that part of the economy, and people with no guaranteed hours of work on 0 hours contracts. There are about 905,000 people on those. Then there is what the report calls the hidden economy. That's those cash-in-hand payments to your window cleaner that avoid tax and official records. The report says that is worth £6.2 billion a year and should be brought to an end. Mr. Taylor says in his review that much of this new world of work is good work, but for those being exploited, some solutions. Sick and holiday pay benefits, a right to an enhanced minimum wage because the work does not guarantee hours. Then there's talk of better enforcement of the present laws and higher taxes for those gig firms, paying national insurance for the first time, which many of them avoid at the moment. The big question, will any of this ever happen, given the Conservatives lack one important thing, a majority?
You can't frankly give any guarantees that you will be able to pass a report like this and the recommendations that it's had through Parliament.
I would hope, as I said in my speech, that people will see across the political world, will see the importance of addressing this as an issue. This isn't just a sort of here and now, it's actually about the future of our economy.
There seems little chance of consensus. Labour said the report was a huge missed opportunity, particularly when it came to not banning 0 hours contracts.
We have to get rid of 0 hours contracts. Obviously, we've got to get rid of the gig economy and the bogus self-employment, which actually is a wonderful way for a minority of employers to evade paying employers' national insurance contributions.
Remember this guy? Sir Philip Green published a government report on efficiency, or HIM. Sir Andrew Dilnot, a full review of social care. Reports published with a fanfare of publicity that then gently gathered dust on some Whitehall shelf. The fear for Mr. Taylor is that his report could suffer a similar fate. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Now, the Prime Minister's review into workers' conditions has called for all work in the UK to be fair and decent, paying particular attention to short-term so-called gig economy roles. Mrs May said she'd take the report's recommendations seriously, but it's been criticised by trades unions for tinkering at the edges. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, reports.
For couriers like Alex Marshall, this is what the gig economy looks like. He works 9 hours a day, 5 days a week for the same company, but he's self-employed, which means none of the benefits of an ordinary worker like holiday or sick pay.
I'm kind of in the worst of both worlds, you know. That they treat me self-employed when they want to in terms of holiday. However, they treat me like an employee with the power they have over me, that they can sort of exercise various different powers, which if I was actually self-employed, they wouldn't be able to do.
Good employers have absolutely nothing to fear from our proposals.
It's the employment status of people like Alex that Matthew Taylor, a former Downing Street advisor, examined in his review of working practices, commissioned by Theresa May last autumn.
The review calls on the government to adopt the ambition that all work should be fair and decent, with scope for fulfilment and development.
Alongside the gig economy typified by companies like Uber and Deliveroo, The report also considered the working conditions of the tens of thousands of agency staff and those on controversial 0 hours contracts. In conclusion, the report recommends a new category of worker called the dependent contractor. So couriers and drivers, for example, would get basic rights at work while not being employees. He suggested a higher national minimum wage for hours that are not guaranteed to encourage employers to offer more fixed hours. And workers should have the right to ask for fixed hours and permanent contracts, though companies don't have to agree. Alex, for one, was pleased about the prospect of better rights, but was sceptical how far it would go.
You know, I'm still a little bit nervous that it's all quite vague and that, you know, these companies will still try and sit on the fence until the government properly force their hand.
His company, TDL, said it welcomed the new guidelines and said they should provide greater clarity. The argument about the gig economy feeds into a wider sense of unease about what's happening inside Britain's labour market. Yes, there are plenty of jobs, but many are of low quality. At the same time, wages and living standards have stagnated. Crucially, productivity growth, the driver of long-term prosperity, has come to a halt. And it was that some of Britain's biggest bosses came together today to try and solve, arguing better quality work makes for better productivity. Be the Business is the brainchild of Sir Charlie Mayfield, the chairman of John Lewis. He's embraced the drive for productivity on a ginormous scale in a state-of-the-art warehouse. This is where all the action very clearly is. We can see the clothes flying around everywhere. Can you explain to us how it works?
Every single one of these garments is actually linked to a tag. We rotate all of these garments until we find the one that we want, and then automatically it's picked and released for dispatch packing. Historically, in our manual operations, we had a 20-hour cycle. What we do now is we achieve that in 20 minutes.
It's the sheer scale that hits you when you walk around this warehouse. More than 1.5 million items of clothing with 6 orders whizzing out the door every second. But it's also the lack of people, because almost everything you see in this warehouse is high-tech automation. There are very, very few people here. So as productivity is going up, people are going down. I mean, is that a worry? Do you think people do worry about that, don't they?
Understandably, of course they do. We used to, in the old operation, the manual, have 160 individuals. We now have 29. But what we also have is a technology that sits behind what you're seeing here, and what we have as a result of that is completely new roles, completely new career paths, which are much more technically demanding. And what we're seeing now is individuals, therefore, being able to move from what would have been a very manual environment into really technically and very skilled roles, which will set them up for the future.
That's all well and good for John Lewis, a company that's run for the benefit of its staff. But for workers like Alex in the wider economy, that level of well-being and security is still some way down the road.
Siobhan Kennedy reporting there.
A government-ordered review into the so-called gig economy today called for more rights for workers and an end to cash-in-hand jobs. 1.3 million now work in the gig economy, where people often don't have contracts. That's 4% of the UK workforce. But the report says that more than half of those workers also have permanent jobs, suggesting they are using flexible work to top up their income. It also finds that 12% of working-age adults are considering joining the gig economy over the next year.
Self-employment in Britain is on the rise, and with it concerns that workers are being exploited. The Taylor Review was set up to look at how the likes of Deliveroo and City Sprint do business, and it concludes that the balance of power is tipped in favour of employers, but it doesn't name and shame. James Farrar took Uber to an employment tribunal and won the right to the minimum wage and holiday pay. The company is appealing. He's disappointed with the review's recommendations.
We're hoping to see things like a more robust approach towards enforcement. And we are 2 years down the road in our claim against Uber. We still haven't resolved the matter.
The Taylor Review panel makes a series of 50 recommendations. It urges the government to make employment law clearer and to improve enforcement. It recommends that agency workers and those on zero-hour contracts should have the right to request fixed hours. It proposes a higher national minimum wage for overtime for all low-paid workers and reform of the tax system, including a crackdown on cash-in-hand payments. The Taylor Review argues that cash payments, whether they're to builders, window cleaners or gardeners, cost the taxpayer billions and they're unfair on the self-employed who do pay tax in full. Matthew Taylor believes cash in hand is on the way out.
Would I be surprised if in 5 years' time most interactions like that will be cash? I would be surprised, because I've been to countries like Sweden where there are now whole sectors where nobody uses cash, and I think that's probably the future that's coming.
Critics complain this piece of work is all about pillars and principles, that it's well-intentioned but vague. One group of solicitors has called your recommendations feeble.
I don't think 50 recommendations, some of them very far-reaching recommendations, should be described as feeble.
Taylor's proposal for a higher minimum overtime wage for the low-paid could prove radical, potentially leaving 4 million workers in retail and social care better off.
It would be a big deal. It would mean higher costs for business, and the question we've now got to have a debate about is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
The good news is that the British economy is very good at creating jobs, but Matthew Taylor argues we need quality as well as quantity. Joel Hills, News at 10.
Now then, what's happening to the workplace, workers' rights, and how the government regulates or taxes all this? They're big questions which Matthew Taylor attempted to answer today as he published his review on the future of employment. But will the government implement it? And do companies even observe the rules in their present form? Newsnight teamed up with colleagues from BBC London to investigate the work practices of one high street company. And the results, such as pay equivalent to 1/3 of the minimum wage, are shocking. Here's Guy Lynn's report.
We've been investigating a company operating in some of the UK's largest shopping centres. We found workers exhausted and controlled.
It's long hours. Yeah. You need to work 6 days a week. Okay.
Seemingly paid below the minimum wage and denied key work benefits.
I made £15 in 5 hours. Well, I've made zero in 7 hours.
In what's called bogus self-employment.
There are none of the hallmarks there, really, of true self-employment. But worse still, this seems to me to be exploitation of workers.
This is our undercover researcher, Carla, not her real name. She'll try to get a job at a company called Soap & Co, who sells skin products from the Dead Sea. They've got stores across London, including at one of the UK's largest shopping centres, Westfield.
So you need a place to live?
Yeah, I have to look for something where to live. So yeah.
Because we provide as well.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Carla's been invited for an interview with the company's manager.
And you're working on commission.
Okay.
Only.
Okay.
Adva's clear about one thing right from the start.
You're working as a self-employed.
Okay.
You have your NINA?
Yeah, I have that, yeah.
That's good. So you're working as a self-employed, so you are in charge of to report how much you're earning if you want, yeah?
Okay.
And to pay tax and everything?
Yeah.
Okay? Because you are working in our company as a self-employed, okay? It's not like we're hiring.
Yeah.
Okay? Like everyone.
Okay.
And Carla goes on to sign a contract. So here it is. Plenty of references to her being self-employed, an independent contractor. The key, though, isn't necessarily what's written in the contract. It's what actually happens in practice. She should be able to choose as someone who's self-employed, but she has to work a schedule at Soap & Co at Westfield Shopping Centre. And also at Covent Garden, the company's affiliate, Sakare.
From 11 to 21:30, yeah? From 9:30 to 20, yeah? You have the schedule, you will find your name as well here, okay? And after that, all in Sunday. They are coming from 11, are finishing on 8. Yeah, like this.
Hello, gentlemen. Gift for you.
She commences work, selling skincare products on commission, made to work around 60 hours a week.
Okay.
Okay, you want to do them all the time. Okay, so it doesn't matter who, just stop. Okay.
And staff are compelled to work with only 1 day off a week.
Do you know if we can take days off on the weekends?
Not quite.
Huh?
Not quite.
What does it mean?
Usually on the weekend you are all of us here. Like you see, no one has a day off.
We're not allowed 2 days off, are we?
No.
So only one, yeah?
A self-employed person would ordinarily be free to do the work or not do the work on a given day. And if they chose not to do the work, they may have the right to provide a substitute, someone else to do that work in their stead. And that's not what we saw was happening here.
And it quickly becomes clear that staff are heavily controlled, forced to clean without pay, reprimanded for arriving even slightly late.
Sorry, it's just sorry, yeah.
Why didn't you send a message?
I didn't realize it was running late, sorry.
You should realize and you should be paying more attention to it because this is serious work.
And subject to intense scrutiny and penalties, including fines for using mobiles.
Not using your cell phone means not using your cell phone even when I'm not here. And I have cameras. So you were on the phone the whole morning. Whenever I looked, you were with your phone. This time I will not charge you because you're new. Next time I see you on camera writing a message back turned on the customers and you are on the phone, I will charge you like I charge them every time. Yesterday I took 15 pounds from them when I saw them on the phones.
Some of the workers Carla speaks to are exhausted and struggling financially.
15 pounds. You made 15 pounds today. So you've been here like 6 hours, 5 hours.
I came at 11:30, what's the time?
5 hours.
5 hours, yeah.
You made 15 pounds in 5 hours. Well, I've made 0 in 7 hours. Did you just guys get your salary, no?
Yeah, like 100 pounds, because my 2 weeks are like very shitty.
You got 200 pounds for a month?
100.
100 pounds for a month?
No, for 2 weeks.
For 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's very shitty like that.
My lower back hurts, you know, everything, and I'm smashed by physically and mentally, and this is not normal. Yeah, if you're really greedy and you don't think about these things, you don't mind everything to hurt you, but when you see your bank account, you're happy, you know.
Snezana from Bulgaria, like many of the workers here, was recruited from abroad by Soap & Co with the offer of accommodation and a job. Now she's quit.
When people pushing you and they stress you every day, 6 days, 12 hours, you're under stress all the time. And in one moment you're like, okay, that's it for me. I cannot handle it anymore. I was thinking that I will come to do something with my life, and after that, I become like, without any money, basically, they left me without nothing.
By claiming staff are self-employed, this company avoids having to pay a whole host of in-work benefits, such as sick and holiday pay and the minimum wage. And when Carla collects her first pay packet, it's well under the national minimum wage for the hours she's worked.
For 90 hours, I've received like 200 pounds, which makes it like less than 3 pounds an hour.
Yeah, we don't pay by the hour, we pay by sales. So your sales are getting better and better.
Yeah.
So your salary is going up and up. It's not about you're not working in Zara.
Our Peter Dutt is one of several employment lawyers who have now reviewed the BBC's evidence and footage.
It reminds me of our bygone days, those days where we used to have master-servant relationships. Based on all the evidence that I've seen, this is false self-employment, and this is much more an employment relationship than any I have seen. But unfortunately, quite an exploitative employment relationship.
Soap & Co says it takes its responsibilities under UK law very seriously and are extremely concerned about the allegations about their company's working arrangements. They are now reviewing those allegations and the implications, if any, regarding the employment status of those who work with them. We also tried to contact these managers we filmed. They're yet to respond. Bogus self-employment allows companies to get away with not spending vast amounts of cash on their staff. We've been told of many similar cases of employment laws being abused, workers exploited, their basic rights denied.
Guy Lynn with that investigation. Westfield told us tonight that the company was concerned about the reports regarding Soap & Co, but was unable to comment on specific allegations. In a statement, the firm said their shops in their stores were responsible for managing their own staff. Separately, we should point out that our report was about the company Soap & Co. There is another organisation with a similar name, The Soap Co, which is not connected.
I've been